Only grace can change human nature. 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 When you stand up in front of a mirror and look into that mirror and take a few moments to ponder, what do you see in that mirror? When I look in front of a mirror, what do I see? It's easy to see somebody who is very, very slow in their spiritual growth and is quite discouraged. It's easy to see somebody who falls short of his own ideals. It's easy to see somebody who falls short of God's ideals. And there is sufficient evidence in all of these. Is that what you see? Shame, disappointment, a fraud, a hypocrite? If Paul was standing in front of a mirror at the time that he was writing our first verse in today's outline, this is what he would say. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. By the grace of God, I am what I am. By the grace of God, I am what I am. By the grace of God, I am what I am. I am a man favored by God because of grace and nothing else. I am favored by God. I wonder if in the morning when you get ready for your day, what it would be like if you stood in front of the mirror and said, I am a man or a woman favored by God. I am a man or a woman favored by God. When I think of that, I think really of sort of two categories of God's grace. There is the kind of grace that he gives that lavishes love upon me in spite of who I am. I am loved. And secondly, there's a type of grace that is a holy fire that is at work in my human nature, changing me. Both of these things are powerful instruments of God in our life. What would it be like to wake up on Monday morning and have some different words that you said as you looked in the mirror? Paul said, by the grace of God, I am what I am. His grace to me was not in vain. He could get up on Tuesday. He could get up on Wednesday. He could get up on Thursday, no matter what happened on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and say the same thing as he looked in that mirror. That is the power of grace. Now, grace also teaches us several things, and our passage for today comes from Titus 2, 11 to 14. For the grace of God brings salvation and has appeared to all men. It teaches us, and we're going to look at 5 things that grace teaches his children. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly desires, to live self-controlled, upright, godly lives in the present age while we wait for the blessed hope, the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us, that he might redeem us from every lawless deed and purify for himself a people for his own possession, eager to do what is good. And that's the 5th thing that we'll look at in this particular passage. The first thing that grace teaches us, it teaches us to disown sin. To disown sin is the word here. Now, the translators in the NIV have said, it teaches us to say no. And that's an okay translation of this. But just saying no is really not strong enough for this word. The word is to disown. To disown. Temptation comes your way, you disown it. The same Greek word is used of Peter denying the Lord 3 times, except it's a little bit more intensive because he didn't just disown Jesus, he denied even knowing him. But it's the same root word. To disown sin. Now, one of the things that's hard to do is that even as a Christian, you've noticed probably after a couple of weeks of salvation that temptation still comes your way. And even after many, many years of walking with Christ, temptation is still very, very strong. And sometimes it can seem overpowering. Sometimes it seems like it has a hold on us. Why can temptation feel so strong? I'm reminded of the story of over in Africa when either people who want to capture monkeys for zoos or the people that live there and eat monkeys for part of their meals. How do you catch a monkey? He's very quick. They climb up in trees. They bounce around. Very difficult. But somebody came up with a very ingenious way. The people go and cut some nuts out of the trees that the monkeys love to eat. And they take a few of these nuts and they put them in a large, like a bucket, a glass bowl, but with a very thin neck. And they just drop the nuts in this glass bowl. It's very heavy, too heavy for the monkeys to move. And they just spread them out on the jungle floor. And then they go about their business, and overnight, and then in the morning they come back. And when they come back to check the glass bottles, there are monkeys captured everywhere. I think, how could that happen? Well, the monkeys smell the aroma of those nuts, and they are enticed. They are tempted to come over there. But temptation it wants to grip us and hold us. And in the same way the monkey puts his paw in there, and he sees those nuts, and he grabs a handful. And when he grabs a handful, now he has a fist that's too big to extricate from that big glass bowl. He just can't do it. All night, he stays in that position, holding his grip on those nuts. And in the morning, when he can see people coming to capture him, even then, he refuses to open up his fist, let go of the nuts to free himself, to extricate himself. He will not disown the nuts in that particular case. And it has a powerful effect upon him, more than he imagined. In your handout, there are 5 things that strike me when I think about temptation and the power of temptation. Why is that so seductive to us? Number 1, temptation glamorizes our old sins. It idealizes what I used to do. Second, it minimizes its bad effects from our memory. We don't recall some of the misery that we went through because of our sin. Third, it causes us to become blind to the emptiness, loneliness, shame that we've experienced because of sin. Number 4, it blinds us to the consequences our ungodliness inflicted on other people and on ourselves. And number 5, it enchants us with this message. This time, I'm going to be smart about it. This time, I'm going to do it different. And we are like the monkey. His paws now clasped around those nuts, thinking that he has what he wants. What he does not see is that he's trapped by his own desires. That's the nature of temptation. Now, he says to disown 2 things in this passage. The first is ungodliness. The Greek word is aseibia. It just means ungodliness. And the word means to be defiant. To be defiant. It means to be defiant towards God's law. But even more than that, to be defiant towards God's person. There's something that you and I see that we want to do. And there's something in us, whether it's through the scripture or through our own conscience or God's law written in our hearts, that says, I know I shouldn't do it, but this word ungodliness says, to hell with what that says. That's this word, defiance. The second thing it says is worldly desires, epithumia. This is the word usually translated lust or craving. And the picture of the monkey craving and grasping on to these nuts in his glass jail is the picture of this. Paul says, disown these things. Have nothing to do with them. Second thing grace teaches us is to live with self-control. To live with self-control. The grace of God brings salvation. It appeared to all men. It teaches us to say no, to disown ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled. Now, in the modern translations, to try to keep up with sort of how English changes and the nuances of the English language changes, there are some translations that here say, and to live soberly. And that's a pretty good translation, except in our world today, when you think of someone being sober, what you typically think is you sort of compartmentalize that to staying off of alcohol and staying off of drugs. And that's kind of how we use this term, to be sober. But the word is much deeper than that in its meaning. It means to stop and ponder and consider, and then to be self-controlled. To be self-controlled. The Greek word is sophron. It's a compound word. The first part of this word means salvation or saved. The second part is the Greek word for mind. To have a saved mind, a sound mind. My mother, when I was a kid growing up, I would tell her something foolish, which I was prone to do, and she said, "Seth, that's just stinking thinking." Well, this is the opposite of stinking thinking. It's being able to look at the world as it is, to be able to look at temptation as it is, and to look at my own human nature as it is, and give pause to myself. To think here, he says. Be sober, Peter says. Be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Satan is out there, wants to climb on that horse of temptation and ride your way. And Peter says, you better be careful. Keep your eyes open. Be sober. Be self-controlled. 1 Peter 1:13, therefore gird up your minds. The same idea. Think. Think well is the idea. See reality as God defines it and as it is, not just how we want to define it and think about it. Be sober, same word. Set your hope fully on the grace that is coming to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, how I used to live. As he who called you is holy, be holy in yourselves. All your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. Sin is such a powerful thing. It seems to me that we often we don't just minimize temptation, but we also minimize the power of sin. There was a man a number of years ago that was on a trip over to Africa, and he decided to adopt a little chimp. And he paid some money to somebody to get one, and he brought it back home. And it was just so delightful. This little chimp was so cute. And the chimp liked to crawl around and walk around and climb up on things. He held the chimp. It was just so cute. He just loved the chimp. As time went on, he realized that this chimp was much more aggressive than he thought it was going to be. And eventually he had it caged, which was a good thing, because what he found out, he had not adopted a chimp. He had adopted a gorilla. And as this thing got bigger and bigger and bigger, he kept it behind a lock cage. One day, he was not careful about that lock. He turned his back on the gorilla, and the gorilla came running out of that cage and killed him. Now, when I think of that story, I think this is how sin is. In our mind, it starts out as such a small thing. What could be so wrong with this? It feels so right. And we have no idea the seductive power of sin to grip our hearts and to bring consequences and pain far more than what we imagine. When I think of this quality of self-control or being sober-minded, it reminds me of something from our American history. Back when our founders were trying to craft a new nation independently of England, there were a lot of books that were written about the latest political theories, which our forefathers read voraciously. But they were also people of the Bible. And they understand how human nature worked in many ways. And one of the things they decided to do, what they realized was, if you're going to have liberty, meaning less government intrusion on our lives, liberty, then what that required of the people was to be a virtuous people. And what the political theorists at that time they called that self-government, the ability to govern oneself. Now, 240 years later, when we think of the term self-government, I think about President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address: of the people, by the people, for the people. You might think of self-government as democracy. And that's kind of how we use that today. But 240 years ago, the way that our framers used that was the way that's described here in Titus. That we can have limited government to the extent our people are virtuous. The less our people are virtuous, the need there is for the heavy hand of government to control our human nature. So our first thing grace teaches us is to disown sin. The second thing is to live with self-control. Number 3, grace teaches us to live righteously. Verse 12, it teaches us to say no to ungodliness, worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright is the word. And the Greek word is dikaiosune. And one of the ways that this used to be spelled years ago, which is really cool, because it really pulls out the meaning of this word. It used to be, instead of righteousness, it was called in English right wiseness. Right wiseness. Wow, love that. Righteousness is described of who God is and his character, and he's righteous in all of his ways. He's righteous in his character. What does that mean for us to live righteously? In its narrowest form, putting the cookies on the bottom shelf, it means that we live as doing right by God and right by people. I want to do right by God, and I want to do right by people. Righteousness. Number 4, grace teaches us to be godly, is how he describes it, or godlike, not in that my nature is godlike. We're nothing like a divine being, but godly. Verse 12, it teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, to live self-controlled, upright, godly lives in this present age. The Greek word is eusebia, which is another compound word. The EU on the front means something is well. Well. And the rest of the word means devout, to be well devout, well devoted, to be thinking about God. Now, he's not necessarily talking about being religious. That's probably where most of our minds go. But he's talking about how we act, how we relate, the things that we say. Are we reflecting something of the character of God? Is the idea behind this. Or maybe even more specifically, is how I'm living bringing delight to him? That is an important concept, especially when you look in the mirror Monday morning. I have the potential to bring him delight today. That's this word, godly. Now, how do we be godly? Well, sometimes, we use our hands by serving. Sometimes our feet by going somewhere. Sometimes we use our mouth by what we say, or our ears by listening to people and listening for more in their story than what they're saying. Sometimes we use our money, even in the simplest of ways. 10 days ago, Greg Garza bought 10 tickets for Angel Stadium. 10 of us went at no cost for the tickets. And we had a great time. And we were out in the left field bleachers, and we had good seats. It was shady, and we were having a good time. And there were 10 of us all in one row. And I was on the right end of this row. And to my left was a Hispanic family. And right behind them was another young Hispanic family. And right behind them was a young Hispanic family. And they all seemed to be friends. The guys were very engaged in the game. The women seemed to be all about talking to one another. The boys loved watching the baseball game. They were hoping there would be a home run that they could go get. But there were 3 girls about ages 4 to 6 that looked like they were bored to tears. But very ingenious creatures, you ladies. And so these 3 girls would walk over to the end of our row, and there are steps that go up to the concourse. And as you walk up these steps, right down the middle of these steps, there's a handrail that goes up. So you can walk on this side or you can walk on this side, and there are breaks in the handrail. And these 3 girls had figured out how to play games on these steps and these handrails. It's pretty cute watching them. And they were having a good time. Along about the 7th inning, I thought, come on, Seth, come on. Hey, wake up here. This isn't just about baseball. I got up, walked down the aisle, walked up the stairs, went or left to the concourse looking for a particular vendor. And I finally found one all the way down about where third base is. It was the cotton candy guy. I waved at him, and he was happy to see somebody wave at him. And we came down, I pulled out a 20. I said, I want 3 cotton candies. I gave him the 20, and there was kind of this pause. Do you know how much cotton candy costs at Angel Stadium? $20 was not enough to buy 3 balls of cotton candy. And he told me, and then finally he just sort of, I think he took mercy on me. He said, close enough. Thanks, because that's all I had. That's all I had. But who would have thought more than 20? I thought, man, I'm putting somebody's kid through college by saying, maybe I should be selling cotton candy at Angel Stadium. I took my 3 cotton candies, walked around the concourse, came up to the top of the steps. And when I got to the top of the steps, I made eye contact, I think, with a 5-year-old. And she was probably as far away from me as the sound booth is. And I just kind of leaned over with my 3 cotton candies and waved them like this. And she looked at me like, oh my gosh. Started down the aisle, step by step. Continued eye contact with that little 5-year-old. We got closer and closer, and her eyes just started beaming. Big grin on her face, because she knew I was committed to giving at least one of them. I wonder if she thought she was going to get all 3 of them. That's probably what I would have thought. So we got closer and closer, and got down right to her aisle. And I leaned down. I said, do you like cotton candy? And she did a quick glance at her parents. And her mom was, you know, giving the nod, yeah, it's good. And her dad was laughing. He already knew. Gave her the cotton candy. She was just like, wow. And she walked over by her parents, started eating the candy. Well, the other 2 girls were watching this performance. And the 6-year-old was kind of like, but she was frozen. The 4-year-old had a little bit more gumption. She came over as if to say, I'm next. And she was. And then the 6-year-old, I waved her over. I said, do you like cotton candy? She said, yes. Gave her the cotton candy. It was just one of those great moments. Walked back to my seat and sat down. It took me about a week later when I thought about an incident from the life of Jesus, where a bunch of children were crowding around Jesus and the disciples were trying to, they're probably annoying and trying to shoo him away. And he said to his disciples, no, let him come. For such is the kingdom of God. And it suddenly dawned on me. In just that little cotton candy experience, I had become something like God, like Jesus, in the smallest of ways. And I thought, Lord, you're still working on me and you're still changing me. Of course, the next morning, when I thought about this, I thought, why did it take me till the 7th inning to do that? That's what godly, to be God-like, to be like him. Number 5, grace teaches us to be eager to do good. To be eager to do good. Verse 14, speaking of Jesus, who gave himself for us, that he might redeem us from every lawless deed and purify for himself a people for his own possession, eager to do what is good. eager to do what is good. Now, generally speaking, maybe you're like this. If you think about doing good, maybe the first thing that comes to your mind is Thanksgiving. Maybe I'll go down to the soup kitchen and help them, prepare food, help pass out trays, be a greeter, pour lemonade or water cups for people. And there's nothing wrong. That's a good thing to do. Do that. But that's not what he's talking about in verse 14. He's not talking about an action. He's talking about an attitude. Those who are eager to do what is good. And that's different. Because I have to tell you that most of the time when there's an opportunity to serve that comes my way, what I find first arising in me is wanting to begrudge this, hoping that it'll just go away. I just, if it's convenient, if I can fit it in, then I'll do it. That's a long way from eager to do what is good. Maybe when somebody asks you to do something, maybe you're like this. When the principal asks for volunteers to participate in the team building icebreaker at the back to school staff meeting, we're all looking for cover. I hope he doesn't call on me. The last few weeks, you've heard Mark and Sarah talk about children's ministry. And we've set this up to be as easy peasy as possible. We ask the people to serve one time a month. The schedule is flexible. We understand when there's vacations and when you get sick, and we have people that do backup for this. If you happen to do this, this is not a rigid thing, but it helps us if Sarah particularly and Mark know we can count on these people, even if the schedule changes, to get us the ministry to the kids we want. This is part of who we are. This is part of what we do. We're in the people building business. Not just adults, but children. And this doesn't happen because they're on the other side of that wall. It happens because people sign up, they go over there once a month, they give of themselves to those kids during that time. It's your cotton candy moment with people. Eager to do what is good. Grace teaches us 5 things: to disown sin, to live self-control, to live godly, to live righteously, and to be eager to do what is good. Eager. Now, this particular passage that we've looked at is a very strong warning to us about the nature of temptation and the nature of sin. These are things you cannot toy with. These are things that get a life of their own. And before long, they get a grip on our lives. And before long, we can become enslaved to these things. All the while thinking, well, I just can't give this up. This is who I am. That's how our human nature works. To be sober-minded, to live with self-control, to disown sin requires a mind that's sharp and makes decisions and does what you can to follow through. Years ago, there was a logger who was up in the Pacific Northwest, and the way that they used to cut down trees, they would take the trees and cut them down at the very top of the mountain, and they would trim off all the branches, and they built sort of a log ride kind of thing, a flume with a stream of water going down. And instead of hauling these big trunks, thousands and thousands of pounds of tree down by hand or horseback, they just lifted it up into the flume, and gravity and water and the steepness of the mountain just allowed that log to flow down that flume even faster than the log ride at a local amusement park. One particular day, everybody was done, and one of the loggers, he thought he was the last guy to leave. He walked over, and rather than walking down the mountain like they used to do, what they realized they could do is they could do the log ride without a log. And they would hop at the top and drive this thing down, down the flume with the water and dump them out in the river, and they would just swim over to the side. They'd go and have dinner. So this one particular logger did that. And he was hurtling down the side of that mountain, thinking about dinner, and he got about 3/4 of the way down when he got his left arm caught between two of the sideboards. And he was stuck. It was a steep part of the flume. The water was coming at a fast pace. Gravity was at work. He could not extricate his left arm. He tried to do that for about 5 minutes, and he really didn't know what he was going to do. And then he heard something that sent a chill through his body. There were still a few guys at the top of the mountain, and they just loaded another log into the flume. And he could hear the sound of that log hurtling down the flume. He could feel the vibration of the flume as the log and the water were making their dance down that way. And he knew he had just a few seconds before he would be crushed in that flume by that heavy log. And he did the only thing he could think of to do. He pulled out his axe from his belt, and with one mighty chop right above where he was attached to the left boards. And gravity in the water did its best and flowed him down into the river. And the current started to take him down, and right after that, the log went. You think that man was glad that he had an axe? And that he was glad that he had done what he had done? Of course he was. Because of the alternative. This is an image of what Paul is telling us in this passage in Titus 2. You cannot toy with temptation, and you cannot toy with sin. It will grab you and eat you over time. Let's pray together. Father, we don't normally think about living soberly, to use our mind, to gird up our mind, to see life as it is, not just how we want it to be, how it ought to be, how it feels like it should be. All of those things are terrible assumptions to make about life and about our human nature. They all lead to the same place, to misery and consequences that we never imagined we would experience or that we would inflict on somebody else, until we find ourselves like that monkey, trapped by men who are going to eat them. Or the man who thought he had such a cute little chimp at home, and it was so playful and so nice. What could be so wrong with a chimp? To live soberly is to see life as it is, and to see my human nature particularly as it is, and to take heed, to take precaution, to get as far away from temptation and the seductive power as is possible. And sometimes you and I are like the monkey holding on to those nuts. We are loath to let go of that grip. Or maybe we're like the logger. We find ourselves caught between two sidebars and unable to extricate ourselves. And we wonder, how in the world did I get to this point in life? And God says, there are times to let go of what you're grasping onto. And there are other times when you've got to take an axe and do some hard surgery in sin in which you're involved in. Either way, or both, the grace of God is richer, deeper, more wondrous than any of that. And in the morning, when you wake up and look in the mirror, you can look in that mirror, if you're a Christian, and say, I am a man favored by God. I am a man favored by God. I am a woman favored by God. I am a woman favored by God, as the truest statement about my identity.